Hey friends, welcome to my debut video. I've thought about starting something like this for a while and it's finally happening today, and I decided that for my first ever video, to get to know me a little bit, I would introduce you guys to my favorite books. These books have changed my life, and these are the books that I will not shut up about. Without further ado, let's start off my list with The Hunger Games. I feel like I do not really need an introduction to The Hunger Games. This book is, everyone and their mother knows what this book is about. And I actually watched the movies first, and that's what got me into the books. But I love these books as well. It's about Katniss living in Panem. Basically, there's this rule that every year there's a male and a female chosen from each of the 12 districts, and Katniss is one of those kids chosen from her district, District 12, and she goes to these Hunger Games where these kids fight for their lives, and just last man standing wins. And so it's her story, and just there's a little bit of romance, and just such a good book, such a good plot. And it's so intriguing and so scary and really just kind of tragic, but I kind of love that about the book as well. So highly, highly recommend this book. Even if you've watched the movies, I would still recommend reading the books because I think they just take you into the story. And obviously, I think reading books can be a much more personal experience sometimes. And just you can get the characters' thoughts and feelings as they live their lives, and as Katniss goes through this really terrible experience. So highly recommend this book. I gave this book 4.5 stars, I believe. Just incredible. Now, on that same note, I would also recommend Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So this is a prequel to the Hunger Games books, and this is about President Snow before he became President Snow. So basically him growing up, going to school, and just his story, not to give too much away, but this book I actually liked better than The Hunger Games. I gave this book 5 stars. This book, I loved this book. I love a good, I love a good villain story and just giving their perspective and their view. And so I thoroughly enjoyed this book and would highly recommend reading this book. I don't think you need to read it before the Hunger Games books. I read it after, and I actually enjoyed reading it after, but I think you could go either way. Next is kind of a niche little book, and it's actually The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. So this book is a classic, and it is about a little boy in Nazi Germany, and actually he lives next to Auschwitz, what becomes Auschwitz, and his dad is like the head commander person of Auschwitz. I don't know what they're called, but and this kid is just so innocent. He's 8 years old and he does not understand what's going on. He just sees this as a little boy does. He doesn't understand just the terrible side of what's happening right next door, and he actually makes friends with one of the little Jews about his same age, and you just kind of see this world from our main character Bruno, the little boy's point of view, and just the things he doesn't understand, but you know what's going on, and just seeing it from his heart, and how he just doesn't get it. And I think that's one of the things that I actually really liked about this book, is just the innocence of it. And I think it made it so sad, which I actually love sad books and books that make me really feel deeply, and this definitely was one that is a sad book and is a tough book, but I think this book was very good, and I think I gave this book 5 stars as well. Just really hit me. And so this book, another one, obviously would recommend. Next is from kind of the OG romance writer, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now, I hate this cover, but the book itself is very good, and I just wanted to include one of Jane Austen's books. I have read all of her books. I haven't read, I think she has a short story that I have not read, but all of her books, honestly, are really good, and I think I've rated them all at least 3.5 stars, which for me is a pretty good rating. In this, I believe I did rate 4 stars, and basically it's just about this girl in, I think, the 1800s, 1700s, something like that, and her romance story. It's a very popular book. I feel like everybody knows about it. And I would recommend reading this, just honestly for the sake of having read it, especially if you're a romance reader, like having read the OG, at least one of her works, I think is so good. And it really does show the difference, I feel like, between now and back when this was written, back in Jane Austen's time. But it also shows like the similarities, I feel like, and just how we have similar thoughts and feelings, just in a different time, I guess. And there are just some really good classic characters in this. I did watch the movie that came out, I think, in like 2017 or something, with Keira Knightley, and that movie is so good. If you like that movie, this book is basically, I feel like, the screenplay for that, because it is like word for word. They did really, really well with the movie, which you can't always say about movie adaptations, but I think they did very well. Next up is one of my favorite books of all time, and just something that holds a very special place in my heart, as with many people's, and that is Harry Potter. I just decided to show this one, but honestly, all of the books were 5-star books for me. They feel very nostalgic for me. I did not grow up off of Harry Potter. I actually started watching the movies like a few years ago, actually, but regardless, they still feel so nostalgic to me for whatever reason. And I read the books afterwards, and these stories are so sweet. There's so much emotion. They're sad. They're fantastic. They just catch your attention, and I think these books, honestly, are some of my favorite books of all time. And I want to reread these soon. Just, they are so warm. They're like a warm hug. The next book that I have is Little Women, and this is another classic, and this book is so sweet, and just, there's so many good life lessons in it. It is very much slice of life, very much just kind of going through the March family's lives. So basically, it's this mother and her 4 daughters, and then the father is fighting in a war, I think, maybe the Civil War? I don't remember. Anyway, and all of these girls are so different, and all of them have their strengths, all of them have their struggles, and it's kind of just watching them grow up and watching them learn these things and watching them love and hurt and grow. And I think this book is just such a good life lesson, and I think, like I said, all of us can learn something from this book. And this book is also sad, but I think I gave this book 4 stars, and I want to reread it and like annotate it, because there's so much meat in these pages for me to put into practice. Next is The Book Thief, and this is another sad book. Honestly, almost all of my favorite books have some element of sadness, or just, I just like a good sad book that makes me feel terrible. That's a good book to me. And this is also takes place in World War II, and I think it is in Germany. Nazi Germany. Yes, it's Nazi Germany. And one thing that I found so interesting about this book is it's actually narrated by death. which obviously for a war book is very fitting, and I've never read anything like that. And it's from the perspective of death, and it's about our main character, Liesel, and she is living with not her mother, because her mother and her brother, something happened to them. And so it's kind of just, I feel like I can't explain that much of it without giving it away, but she meets this Jew, and she's kind of living this life of, she is in Nazi Germany, but she is seeing the horrors, and she is hurting, and it's kind of just watching that and watching what happens to these characters. And this is a book that could make you cry, but I don't remember what I gave this. I think 4 stars or 4.5 stars, something like that. And this was a book that was very sad. So just be prepared going into that. Obviously, it's a war book, so it's going to be sad. The next book that I have, I don't actually own. I read it from the library, but Where the Crawdads Sing. This is another sad book, obviously, and about our main character, Kaya, and she's the marsh girl. She lives out in the swamp, and she's pretty much abandoned, and she's kind of forced to fend for herself from the time she's like 11, and she is, for obvious reasons, very scared of people and very uncomfortable around really anybody outside of her family. She's very closed off and very much just like, I guess, wild, if you will, and just really does live this very primitive life. And she kind of comes into contact with these people, and some people treat her very well, and some people really touch my heart. What's his name? Jumpin' and Mabel, if you know, you know. They are just so sweet to this poor girl. And then there's some other characters that are pretty terrible and kind of stink, and they just treat her like the marsh girl and really treat her with a prejudice against her for her background and for where she came from. And it's in addition to that, a murder mystery of this guy died, and kind of just exploring like, did Kaya do it? Did she not? Who did it? How did this happen? Because it seems like there's just no answer. So it's kind of delving into that, and it's just a lot of things in one book. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought it was a very interesting read. I gave it 4.5 stars. And another book that may make you cry. Next book is also about World War II and about the Nazis and about Germany, and The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. And this book was so good. Honestly, one of my favorite books of this year. I read it this year, obviously. But about these 2 sisters who are living very different lives and making very different choices in World War II, and just which side they're going to take and whether they're going to fight or not. And one of these sisters has a family and has people that she cares about, and this other sister has kind of just been abandoned by everybody, and they both kind of grew up in a tough situation, and kind of how they choose to deal with that and how they deal with their relationship. And I do believe this book may have made me cry, or at least tear up, which honestly is not very, like, I don't cry that often with books, even sad books, so that's saying something. I gave this book 5 stars, and I thoroughly enjoyed it and would highly recommend. Now, the book that I actually read right after that book, I also gave 5 stars, and that is Billy Summers by Stephen King himself. This was my first Stephen King book and my only Stephen King book, but I want to explore more of his works. And this book, I will say, check trigger warnings before reading, because this book is very dark and there's a lot of heaviness and just a lot of pain in this book. And there's a lot of language and just some more sexual scenes and sexual parts of it, but I thought this book was so good, and I love a book that's very much like secret orientated, very much just like brings that kind of that trauma, I guess, if you will. And this book was about Billy Summers, obviously, and he is an assassin, and he is an ex-Marine, and just he's doing his last job, and it's kind of exploring that and how he handles that and the relationships he makes with people. And he's a rough guy, rough around the edges, has kind of a rough story, had a rough childhood, and kind of just exploring that. And I found this book very interesting, very intriguing, and it's a book about an assassin, so obviously there's just kind of those stakes, I guess, and that adventure. And so this book I very much enjoyed, and it was very intriguing. Now, for these next two books are kind of my favorite books of all time, and some of the books that I think of all the time. And to start out with is Rebecca. This is so good. My sister and I both read this book, and we loved it. It's about our main character, who is unnamed throughout the whole book. Hopefully that's not a spoiler, but she isn't named, and I find that super interesting. I have heard people say that it's annoying that she doesn't get a name, but I actually love it because this book is very like gothic, very just like secretive, and there's a lot that we don't know, and it's kind of a murder mystery book, I would say. And so I think her being unnamed actually adds to that kind of sense of like suspense, not knowing what's going on, which I so love. And it's about our main character, and she marries this man who she really doesn't know very well, and she finds out he was married before and his wife died. Now everybody thinks that his wife was just died accidentally in a storm accident out in a boat, but then there comes to the surface some facts that kind of show that maybe it wasn't as accidental as it seemed, and it's kind of delving into that and just this girl's life married to this man and in this house and just this whole world is foreign to her, and her kind of investigating that, which I found very interesting, and I was very intrigued. Like I said, one of my favorite books of all time, and a book I think of regularly, and I also gave this book 5 stars. Last but not least, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is like my favorite author of all time. She writes murder mystery books, and this book is wild. Basically, there's this group of people stuck on an island, and they each keep dying, and it's a very dark, scary book, but it is just so engrossing, and you don't know what's going on, you don't know who's doing it, and you almost feel like you're one of the people stuck on this island, and like just the fear that you're feeling, I feel like I felt it too, and I was there. So I think that just added to the enjoyment of it for me, and I would highly recommend this book. And honestly, all of Agatha Christie's books, I could have had 6 more of her books on this video as some of my favorites. I love this author, absolutely love her. And that is the list of my favorite books. Hopefully you guys got some recs from this video, and thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.